Ever feel like your brain has two drivers with two totally different maps? One is a total stickler for the rules, insisting on the same safe, predictable route every single day. The other is a thrill seeker, yanking the wheel to chase every shiny object and explore every random side street. For those of us with ADHD, this isn't a metaphor. It's the neurological tug-of-war we live with every day. It's this exhausting internal push and pull between what feels like totally opposing needs. In this video, we're breaking down the science behind this conflict and why it is so much more than just being indecisive. This is the reality of having a brain running two contradictory operating systems at the same time. All right, let's properly introduce our two drivers. First up in the driver's seat, we have autism, our rule stickler. This part of the brain thrives on predictability, structure, and routine. Taking the same route every day isn't boring, it's safe. It saves a ton of energy, dials down anxiety, and makes the route feel manageable. An unexpected detour isn't just an inconvenience, it causes genuine distress, like a system error that threatens to crash the whole computer. This driver loves sameness, whether that's eating the same meal for weeks or sticking to a super specific morning ritual. That consistency isn't rigid, it's regulation. Now let's talk about the other guy, the one constantly grabbing for the wheel. ADHD. This is our thrill seeker, our novelty chaser. For this driver, the same old route is a cage. It is painfully boring and understimulating. The ADHD brain is fueled by dopamine, a brain chemical tied to pleasure and reward, and it gets a huge hit from new, interesting, and exciting things. This driver doesn't just want to explore that random side street, it feels like it needs to. It's a chemical strategy to stay engaged and focused. So you have one system that finds peace in predictability and another that finds focus in novelty. This isn't a personality quirk. It's a real physical conflict between the brain's fundamental needs. The result is what you have so many of us with ADHD call being a living contradiction. You're the person who craves a perfectly structured plan but is also hardwired to abandon it for something more exciting. It feels like you're constantly at war with yourself, where one part of your brain is always sabotaging the other. So, what's actually going on in the brain to create this tug of war? This isn't some rare experience. The overlap is huge. Research suggests that somewhere between 50 and 70% of autistic people also meet the criteria for ADHD. And looking from the other direction, studies show that 20 to 50% of people with ADHD have significant autistic traits. The overlap is so significant that for a long time, the official diagnostic manual, the DSM, didn't even allow for a co-diagnosis. That finally changed in 2013 with the DSM-5, but it shows how long it took for the rules to catch up with reality. A simplified way to picture the conflict is as a dance between different brain chemical needs. The ADHD brain is known for its dysfunctional dopamine system. It's under-responsive and requires novelty and high stimulation experiences just to get to a baseline of focus. On the other hand, though, the autistic brain often seeks to reduce overwhelming input, and predictability can help create a sense of calm and regulation, which involves entirely different neurotransmitter systems. This creates what some experts call a state of predictable chaos. One moment, the autistic need for a predictable, low stress environment is in charge. You might build yourself a fortress of stability, a perfect schedule, a meal plan, an organized desk. This fortress keeps you calm. But then the ADHD brain, desperate need for dopamine kicks in. That fortress of stability suddenly feels like a prison. The very routine that was calming now feels suffocating, and you might tear it all down in a quest for stimulation. Neuroimaging studies give us more clues. Research points to differences in connectivity between the prefrontal cortex, the brain's control center, and the limbic system, which generates our raw emotions. In both ADHD and autistic brains, when you're faced with the stress of the internal conflict, the boredom of routine, or the chaos of change, your brain may struggle to send the calm down signal. Effectively, this neurological reality is why the need of an ADHD brain can feel like a moving target. What works one day can totally feel wrong the next. not because you're inconsistent, but because your underlying neurological state has shifted. What's this tug-of-war look like in real life? Let's get out of the lab and look into the real world. What does this neurological tug-of-war actually look like day to day? It shows up pretty much everywhere, creating a bunch of exhausting paradoxes. A classic is planning versus spontaneity. The autistic part of your brain might spend hours creating a beautiful, color coded, minute by minute schedule. The process itself is incredibly soothing, but the second the plan is finished, the ADHD brain looks at it, sees the novelty is gone, and completely rejects it. The plan becomes a source of pressure, so you impulsively ditch it to do literally anything else. We see this with food too. The same food phenomenon is a classic autistic trait for reducing decision making and sensory overload. You might eat the same lunch for 3 months straight and be perfectly happy. Then one day, the ADHD novelty drive takes over, and the thought of that same food is repulsive. This is what they call the yo yo effect. The very thing that brought you comfort suddenly becomes a source of disgust, and you're thrown back into chaos until you find a new temporary safe food. And then there's the over and under stimulation paradox. Yes, you can feel both at the same time. Your autistic sensory sensitivities might make a crowded mall feel like a physical assault. The lights are blinding, the sounds are a nightmare, and yet your ADHD brain is desperately bored, craving the energy of that same environment. The result? You might seek out an intense experience like a loud concert for the dopamine hit, only to find yourself completely overwhelmed and heading for a shutdown or meltdown. This push and pull bleeds into our social lives. The ADHD brain can crave social connection and fast paced chatter, while the autistic brain struggles with the underwritten social rules and the sensory drain of just being around people. This can make you seem hot and cold. One day you're the life of the party, and the next day you need to retreat into total isolation to recover. This isn't a choice. It's about managing a very real energy budget that's being drained by two different systems at once. The exhaustion from this constant internal negotiation leads to a very specific kind of ADHD burnout, a profound depletion that's so much more than just being tired. So, if your brain is locked in this tug of war, what can you actually do? The goal isn't to force one driver to win, it's about getting them to work together. It's about building a life that honors both sets of needs, turning that paradox into a system that actually works for you. First, let's talk about a concept from the ADHD community called structured flexibility. This means creating routines with predictable anchors, but also building in room for novelty. Excuse me. For example, you could have a fixed morning and evening routine which satisfied the autistic need for structure, but the hours in between are left open for more spontaneous, interest driven activities that feed the ADHD brain. Maybe you're planning to work 3 times a week, but you don't decide what you'll do until the day of, which allows for variety inside a predictable frame. Another powerful tool is dopamine bridging. This is a fancy term for pairing something boring with something stimulating. You can listen to a podcast about a special interest while you do the dishes, or put on high energy music while you tackle your emails. This gives your ADHD brain the dopamine it needs to stay on task, while your autistic brain gets the satisfaction of a completed routine. Next, build a sensory toolkit. Your sensory needs will change from one day to the next. Sometimes you'll need to block stimulation out, and other times you'll need to seek it. Your toolkit could have things like noise canceling headphones and sunglasses for sensory avoidance, but also fidget toys, a stimulating playlist, or a weighted blanket for sensory seeking. By having these tools ready, you can respond to your brain's need in the moment instead of fighting them. And finally, one of the most important strategies is radical self compassion and tracking your own cycles. Start to notice your patterns. Do you tend to have a few high energy novelty seeking days, followed by a crash where you need to quiet and routine? By tracking this rhythm, you can learn to anticipate your needs. You can plan to rest after a period of high stimulation instead of feeling blindsided by burnout. This is about shifting your perspective from seeing your brain as broken to finally understanding its unique instruction manual. Living with ADHD means navigating a constant internal push and pull. It's being exhausted by wanting a routine but being physically unable to stick to it. It's the frustration in needing both intense stimulation and profound quiet, often at the exact same time. But this internal tug of war is not a character flaw. It is a real, neurologically based experience. You're not broken, and you're definitely not alone. Your brain isn't at war with itself. It's a complex system trying to meet two very different but equally valid sets of needs. The key is to stop trying to focus or force your brain to be one thing or the other and start building a life that has room for both. It's about learning to embrace the paradox. And that's where this community makes all the difference. It can feel so isolating, but there are so many of us figuring this out together. So I'd love to know, what does the two drivers analogy look like in your life? Which driver tends to be louder for you? Let's discuss it in the comments below because understanding each other is the first step towards turning this conflict into conversation. Don't forget to hit subscribe.